3 minutes. That was exactly the amount of time needed to turn a sun-drenched paradise into an eternal earthly hell. Not an hour, not 30 minutes. Exactly 3 minutes. Arthur Sterling sat motionless in his large architectural office, cold to the point of eeriness. At 50 years old, he possessed a level of prestige many people dreamed of, but his eyes were hollow, holding a black, abyss-like despair. On the glossy mahogany desk, the only thing present was not the blueprints of skyscrapers, but old, worn, yellowed photographs. In the photos were two 3-year-old twin girls with golden blonde hair and smiles bright as sunlight, Lily and Rose. Arthur's trembling fingers brushed over the faces of the two children in the picture, and immediately, the horrifying memory of that day surged back like a tsunami, drowning him in the familiar suffocation. Summer of 1996. The city park buzzed with laughter. "Look, Arthur, aren't those two little girls adorable?" the ice cream seller smiled, pointing toward the pink double stroller. Arthur, then a young father overflowing with happiness, turned to look at his two daughters sleeping soundly. He smiled proudly and pulled out his wallet. "Thank you, sir. Please give me 2 strawberry cones. Rose loves pink." "Right away, young man," the vendor replied cheerfully and bent down to scoop the ice cream. Arthur turned his back to the stroller to take his change. He only bent down to count the few loose coins in his palm. 1, 2, 3. The cheerful jingle from the ice cream cart played brightly. But when he turned back, the world collapsed. The stroller was still there, but it was empty. Arthur blinked, thinking the sunlight had momentarily blinded him. "Lily? Rose?" He called softly, thinking Sarah, his wife, might have come and taken them out to play somewhere. There was no answer. Only the rustling wind and the laughter of other children far away. Arthur's heart began pounding violently in his chest, so hard it hurt. "Lily! Rose! Where are you?" Arthur shouted, his voice cracking with panic. He rushed to the stroller, flipping the small blanket over. Empty. No trace. The two children had vanished into thin air, in broad daylight, right behind him. "Has anyone seen my children? Twin girls. Please. Did anyone see them?" Arthur screamed, running wildly through the crowd, grabbing anyone he passed. The ice cream seller stood frozen, the cone in his hand falling to the ground and melting. "My God. I just saw them right here." Arthur's scream that day tore through the bright blue sky, signaling a tragedy that would last 2 decades. The police came and sealed off the entire area. Search dogs, helicopters, hundreds of volunteers turned over every bush, every trash can. But the result that came back was a perfect zero. No witnesses. No evidence. The two children might as well have never existed. And then, the real nightmare began, not from the disappearance of the children, but from the cruelty of the one who remained. 2 months after the kidnapping, Arthur's house was drowned in darkness and deadly silence. Sarah, his wife, threw the last suitcase into the living room. Her face was gaunt, but her eyes were razor-sharp, devoid of any marital affection. "Where are you going, Sarah?" the weakened Arthur asked, his voice hoarse from crying too much. "We need to stay together right now. The police said there's still hope." "Hope?" Sarah turned back and spat out each word, her voice full of contempt. "You dare say that word? You're the one who lost them." 3 minutes, Arthur. All you had to do was watch them for 3 minutes, and you couldn't even do that. It was an accident. I never meant. Arthur stepped forward, reaching for her hand. "Don't touch me." Sarah screamed, recoiling as if he were a diseased monster. "Every time I look at your face, all I see is failure. I see our children screaming somewhere because their father was busy buying a damn ice cream cone." She threw the divorce papers onto the table. "Sign it. I can't live in this hell with you for another second. I need to forget everything. Forget you, and forget this pain. Sarah, please. Don't leave me now." Arthur collapsed to his knees, begging in despair. But Sarah didn't look back. She walked out the door, slamming it shut, taking with her the last bit of warmth left in the house. After that day, Sarah disappeared from Arthur's life completely, as if she had evaporated along with the two children. Back to the present, 2018. A knock on the door cut through his painful memories. Private Investigator Miller stepped in, holding a thin file. His expression was apologetic, avoiding Arthur's eyes. "Speak," Arthur ordered, not lifting his head from the photo. Miller sighed and sat in the chair opposite him. "Mr. Sterling, I had my team review all the old cameras and the orphanages in neighboring states as you requested. But what?" Arthur growled. "There's still nothing. It's been 20 years, sir. The trail has gone cold long ago. Perhaps you should accept the fact that—" "Shut up." Arthur slammed his hand on the table, making the worn photo jump. His eyes blazed. "Don't ever tell me to accept it. I pay you to find my children, not to give me psychological advice." "But sir, we've exhausted all resources," Miller tried to explain. Arthur stood up, walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, and looked down at the glittering lights of New York City below. He was one of the best architects, but all the money he made had been spent on searching for his daughters. "Keep looking," Arthur said, his voice icy but full of mad determination. "Go through the list of all adoptive families from 1,996 again. Expand the search nationwide. I don't care how much it costs. Keep looking until you find a lead, or until I die." Miller shook his head in resignation, knowing he could not change this man's mind. "All right, Mr. Sterling. I'll try again." The door closed. Arthur sank once more into familiar loneliness. He picked up the photo and pressed it to his chest, where his heart had shattered 20 years earlier. He did not know that fate was about to strike him with a blow more brutal than death, and the clue he had searched for over 2 decades was not in slums or orphanages, but waiting for him in the most glamorous place. December 2018. 22 years had passed since that fateful afternoon. Time did not heal Arthur Sterling's wounds, it only froze him in a block of eternal sorrow. He had become a renowned architect, but his soul was as hollow as abandoned houses. "Mr. Sterling, I'm afraid you can't refuse this time," the voice of his secretary Martha came through the phone, pulling Arthur out of his daze beside a half-empty bottle of whiskey. Arthur rubbed his temples, his voice hoarse. "You know I hate crowds, Martha. Send a gift. Send something expensive. Send something expensive, that I Martha Rediaspors." "That won't do, sir," Martha said patiently but firmly. "This is the wedding of Mr. Harrington's daughter. He's been your biggest client for the past decade. He made it clear, if Arthur doesn't come give my daughter his blessings, he doesn't need to design my new tower anymore. You must fly to New York." Arthur let out a bitter laugh. "A threat? Fine. Book the ticket. I'll show up, drink 1 bland glass of wine, and leave before dessert is served." New York welcomed Arthur with the bone-chilling cold of December. The wedding was held at St. Patrick's Cathedral, an emblem of power and luxury in the heart of Manhattan. Arthur stood pressed into a hidden corner near the massive marble columns. He wore an expensive black suit, but it still looked out of place on his gaunt, worn-out body. Around Arthur was an entirely different world, ladies in diamond-studded haute couture gowns, gentlemen discussing billion-dollar mergers instead of love. The overwhelming mix of perfume and money made Arthur nauseous. "Did you see who just arrived?" a woman whispered excitedly to her husband. The husband straightened his bow tie, his eyes lighting up. "It's the Vance family. Richard Vance and his mysterious wife. Rumor has it their wealth just passed the $5 billion mark after the Dubai deal. Look at Mrs. Vance," the woman marveled. "Evelyn Vance. They say she's the standard of high society. Never seen her smile, but that beauty, it's powerful." Arthur took a sip of his drink, turning away because he didn't care about the vanity of these people. But the name, Vance, suddenly triggered something in his brain. Richard Vance, the infamous real estate mogul, Arthur's biggest client. The grand doors of the cathedral swung open. Light from outside poured in, forming a brilliant halo around the special guest stepping out of a sleek black limousine. Richard Vance entered first, exuding the commanding confidence of a man who owned the world. But Arthur wasn't looking at him. Arthur's eyes were fixed on the woman holding Richard's arm. She wore a midnight blue velvet gown, a pearl necklace worth a fortune around her neck. Her face was flawlessly made up, radiating a cold, regal beauty no one dared stare at directly. But Arthur was different. The glass in his hand began trembling. That walk. The way she tilted her head slightly to the right when listening to her husband. The way her pinky finger curved a little when holding her jeweled clutch. No way. Arthur muttered, his voice choking as if squeezed shut. It can't be her. The man standing next to him turned, annoyed at being disturbed. Excuse me, what did you just say? Arthur didn't answer. He stepped forward, ignoring etiquette, squinting as if trying to see through the heavy makeup. The memory of Sarah, the simple woman who once fainted in his arms after losing their children, the woman who wore cheap floral dresses, was violently clashing with the image of Queen Evelyn Vance before him. Sarah had left 20 years ago. She said she wanted to forget the past. But how could an ordinary, devastated woman transform into the queen of New York high society? At that moment, as if feeling the burning stare from the shadows, Evelyn Vance turned her head. Her eyes swept over the crowd, sharp and emotionless. But when they passed Arthur's position, she froze for a split second. Just 1/10 of a second, but Arthur swore he saw her pupils tighten. Evelyn, what's wrong? Richard Vance leaned down to ask his wife. Evelyn quickly regained her frightening composure. She smiled a cold, manufactured smile. Nothing, Richard, her voice rang out. That voice. Even though she had deliberately refined it to sound more sophisticated, that tone, it had haunted Arthur in his dreams for nearly 20 years. I just saw a little mouse wander into a lion's feast. Mouse? Richard raised an eyebrow, looking around but seeing nothing suspicious. Let's go. Evelyn tightened her grip on her husband's arm, pulling him toward the front row, not sparing Arthur a single glance. Arthur stood rooted in place. The blood in his body froze, then boiled. That was Sarah. It had to be Sarah. But why? Why was she here? The sound of the organ reverberated from the high arches of St. Patrick's Cathedral, solemn and majestic, signaling the arrival of the most important moment. The massive oak doors opened once more, and blinding white light poured in like a silver waterfall, embracing the slender figure of the bride. Arthur Sterling still stood frozen in the shadows, his heart pounding as if it would explode after seeing Evelyn. But when the bride entered, time around him seemed to stop. All the noise, the whispers of high society, faded away, leaving only the pounding pulse in his ears. The bride, Isabella Vance, looked angelic in a pristine white lace wedding gown, a sparkling diamond tiara on her head. Walking behind her, lifting the long sweeping veil, was the bridesmaid Sophia Vance. Arthur held his breath. 2 young women. Identical like 2 drops of water. The same golden blonde hair. The same blue eyes. And most importantly, they were the same age. My God, look at the Vance sisters, a lady near Arthur whispered in awe. Isabella and Sophia, the golden twins of New York. Breathtakingly beautiful. I heard Richard Vance cherishes those 2 daughters more than his own life, her husband replied. Look at the way he watches them. The keyword, twins, exploded in Arthur's mind like a bomb. He tried to calm himself, telling himself it was just a coincidence. There were millions of blonde twin girls in the world. Sarah or Evelyn might have remarried and had new children. He couldn't allow himself to hallucinate. But when Isabella walked past him, the bright crystal chandelier above shone directly on her face. She smiled, lifting her chin slightly in pride. And right at that moment, Arthur saw it. Under the left side of Isabella's chin, cleverly covered by foundation but still clearly visible under the strong light, a crescent-shaped scar. The memory rushed back, sharp as a knife cut. 1995. The living room of the old house. Little Lily, 2 years old, wobbling as she learned to walk, Arthur had looked away for 1 second to answer the phone. The child fell and hit her chin on the edge of the glass table. Blood. Screaming. Arthur had held her in his arms, singing Moon River, until she stopped crying, vowing he would never forgive his own carelessness. That scar was unique. Impossible to mistake. Lily. Arthur breathed out, his voice breaking, trembling so much he himself couldn't hear it clearly. His eyes darted to the bridesmaid Sophia walking behind her. Rose. That was Rose. The same slightly upturned nose when she smiled. The same walk. His children. The children he had searched for over 20 years in orphanages, in slums, in news reports about unidentified bodies. They were not there. They were here. Living right in front of him. Wealthy. Beautiful. And perfect. Crash. The glass of red wine slipped from Arthur's numb fingers and fell onto the marble floor. The sound of shattering glass rang out sharply, cutting through the gentle music, creating a deadly silence in the cathedral. Red wine spread across the floor like a pool of fresh blood. Hundreds of heads turned at once. Displeased, scrutinizing eyes locked onto the middle-aged man in an old suit, standing and trembling like a madman. Who is that guy? Drunk? A man whispered with contempt. Where are the security guards? How did they let someone like this in? A woman snapped. But Arthur heard nothing. He didn't care about the crowd. He didn't care about the humiliation. He slowly lifted his head, staring straight toward the front row. There, Evelyn Vance had turned around. Not frightened. Not avoiding him. She looked directly into Arthur's eyes across the vast space of the cathedral. Those eyes were cold, sharp, and filled with cruel defiance. She smirked, a smirk meant only for him, as if to say, yes, it's me. These are your children. But what can you do about it? On the altar, Richard Vance, the most powerful man in the room, stepped down and took Isabella's hand. He looked at the bride with the overflowing love of a great father. I love you, Isabella, Richard said, loudly enough for Arthur to hear through the speakers. Today you are the most beautiful bride in the world. Isabella smiled, her eyes brimming with happiness. She wrapped her arms around Richard. Thank you, Father. Thank you for giving me this life. I love you more than anyone. I love you too, and Sophia as well, Richard said, turning to gently hug his other daughter. That sentence pierced Arthur's heart like a knife, more brutal than any torture. They called another man, Father. They saw another man as their whole world. They were living a royal life that Arthur, with all his desperate efforts, had never even dared to dream of. Arthur stepped back, crushing shards of broken glass underfoot. The physical pain was nothing compared to the collapse inside his soul. He had not lost his children. He had been erased from their lives. His existence, his painful 20-year devotion, all meant nothing in the face of their perfect happiness. Ladies and gentlemen, the priest announced, pulling everyone's attention back to the ceremony. Who gives this bride to the groom? I do, Richard Vance declared proudly, his voice full of pride. I, her father. Arthur shut his eyes tightly. Hot tears streamed down his hollow cheeks. He wanted to scream, to rush up there and tear apart this theatrical lie. But his legs were paralyzed. That wealth, power, and fabricated happiness were like an impenetrable fortress, and he was just a beggar standing outside the gates, watching his own flesh and blood being raised by another man. When the ceremony paused for guests to move to the cocktail hall, Arthur rushed away like a madman. He pushed through the guards, following the silhouette of the woman in the blue velvet gown disappearing behind the oak door of the VIP family room. Arthur shoved the door open and stepped inside. The room was filled with the scent of lilies and an artificial stillness. Evelyn Vance was standing before the mirror, calmly touching up her deep red lipstick. She didn't startle when Arthur burst in, as if she had calculated the exact moment he would appear. Sarah. Arthur roared, his voice carrying 20 years of suppressed fury. Or should I call you Evelyn? Or the kidnapper? Evelyn slowly turned around, placing the lipstick on the marble counter with a soft but sharp click. She looked Arthur up and down, her eyes devoid of guilt, only cold pity. Lower your voice, Arthur, she said, her tone eerily calm. You don't want to ruin the greatest day of your daughter's life, do you? Oh, right, our daughter. You dare say those words? Arthur stepped forward, fists clenched, his whole body shaking. You orchestrated everything. The empty stroller. The disappearance. The divorce. You stole my life. You let me live in hell for 20 years while you sat here in comfort. Ha! Evelyn curled her lips into a mocking smile. She walked toward the small bar in the corner of the room, leisurely pouring herself a glass of wine. Stole? She said. No, Arthur. I saved their lives. She lifted the glass under the light. Look at them out there. Lily graduated top of her class at Yale. Rose runs a fashion company worth millions. They speak 3 languages, travel on private jets, and have never had to worry about rent. She spun around abruptly, her eyes sharp as blades stabbing into Arthur's face. If I hadn't done it, if I had left them in that leaky apartment with you, who would they be now? Some poor, rural girls marrying some penniless men and scraping by each day. Richard gave them the world. And you? What could you have given them? Can your love be ground up and eaten? I worked myself to death. Arthur shouted back, his voice choked with anguish. I am a successful architect now. I have money. I can take care of them. Successful? Evelyn laughed, a shrill, venomous laugh. Compared to Richard Vance, you're just a grain of sand. Could your entire fortune even buy one of Isabella's fingernails right now? You think you can compensate for what they have? Arthur froze. The overwhelming wealth of the Vance family was undeniable. But morality did not lie there. That is deceit, Sarah. You built everything on deceit, Arthur shouted, pointing toward the door. Richard doesn't know the truth, does he? What does he think you are? A poor, pitiful widow. Evelyn set down her glass of wine, stepped closer to Arthur until her cold breath brushed against his face. That's right. Richard thinks my ex-husband died in a car accident, along with my impoverished past. He loves Lily and Rose as if they were his own because he believes they have no one left but him. She paused for a beat, lowered her voice to a whisper full of threat, delivering the final killing blow. Listen carefully, Arthur. If you walk out there and tell the truth, you won't just destroy this family. You'll take everything away from your children. Richard is extreme when it comes to loyalty. If he learns I deceived him for the past 20 years, he'll throw everyone out on the street. Isabella will lose her inheritance. Sophia will lose the company. They will lose all their reputation, money, and the billion-dollar future waiting for them. Arthur stood frozen. A chill ran down his spine. Are you selfish enough to do that, Mr. Pure Silver? Evelyn sneered, using his old nickname. You love them, don't you? If you love them, then shut your mouth and disappear. Let them continue being happy princesses. Your presence will only bring them poverty and shame. You. Arthur stammered, his throat dry. His reason screamed in protest, but the father in him bled. He glanced through the crack in the door and saw Isabella smiling radiantly as she raised her glass with Richard. That smile was heartbreakingly beautiful. Did he have the right to extinguish it? Think carefully, Evelyn said, adjusting his collar, a gesture so fake it was nauseating. Be a noble father who died, or a selfish destroyer who lives. The choice is yours. With that, Evelyn turned and walked out of the room, leaving Arthur standing alone in the luxurious space, torn between justice and fatherhood, between brutal truth and glamorous lies. He clutched the phone in his pocket, his thumb trembling over the dial button for the police. One press. Just one press and justice would be served. But the price would be the tears of the 2 daughters he loved more than life. Arthur slowly lowered his hand, eyes shutting in excruciating pain. Arthur stood alone behind the half-closed door of the waiting room, his hand gripping the phone in his pocket so tightly his knuckles turned white. Through the narrow crack, the bright light from the banquet hall shone in, forming a cruel dividing line between the darkness where he stood and the heaven where his daughters were laughing. He saw Richard Vance bending down to fix the ribbon on Sophia's dress. The real estate mogul's eyes glowed with the tenderness Arthur had longed to give for 20 years but never had the chance to. Next to them, Isabella lifted her champagne glass, her radiant smile untouched by a speck of dust. Evelyn's poisonous words still echoed in his ears like a curse. Can your love be ground up and eaten? Arthur exhaled, a breath carrying the taste of absolute defeat. She was right. He could give them the truth, but that truth would strip them of their throne. Who was he to trade his daughter's brilliant future for his own sense of justice? "I'm sorry, my girls," Arthur whispered into the empty air, his voice breaking. "I love you enough. Enough for you to never know the pathetic existence of your father. I love you." He let go of the phone. The decision had been made. Arthur turned his back on the light and trudged down the hallway, leading to the cathedral's back exit. He would leave, disappearing into the cold New York night like a ghost just as Evelyn had scripted for him. The hallway was quiet, only the sound of Arthur's shoes tapping against the cold stone floor. But as he walked past the bride's changing room, the door was ajar, and familiar voices drifted out, making his steps freeze. It was Isabella and Sophia. They had escaped the noisy party to touch up their makeup. "Did you see that weird guy earlier in the cathedral?" Sophia's voice sounded annoyed. "The one who broke the wine glass. The way he looked at us was creepy." Arthur held his breath and pressed himself against the icy wall. His heart clenched. In his daughter's eyes, he was just a weird guy. "Don't worry about it, Sophia," Isabella replied, her tone gentle but edged with disdain. "Mother said he was just a drunk guest. But you know who he reminded me of?" "Who?" "Our dear, honorable biological father," Isabella scoffed, her laugh sharp as a blade slicing into Arthur's heart. Arthur's eyes widened. They were talking about him. Curiosity mixed with fragile hope held him there. Was there any trace of the father who once sang them to sleep in their memories? "Mother told me the whole story yesterday. She said we were lucky he died early. Otherwise, our lives would have been miserable." "Why?" "I thought our biological father was just poor." "No," Isabella lowered her voice conspiratorially. "Mother said he was an alcoholic and abusive. This scar under my chin. She said he threw me against a table in a drunken rage because I cried too loudly." Bang! Arthur felt as if an invisible bullet had just shot through his chest. He staggered, grabbing the doorframe to keep from collapsing. "Really?" Sophia gasped, horrified. "My God, that's terrible. No wonder Mother never wanted to talk about him. I thought she was sad, but she was disgusted." "Exactly," Isabella concluded coldly and cruelly. "Living with the genetics of a violent loser like that would have been dangerous. Thank God Father Richard saved us. Father Richard is the truly wonderful one." Silence engulfed Arthur. The grief of losing his children suddenly dissolved, replaced by something far more powerful, far more explosive. Rage. Evelyn hadn't just taken his children. She hadn't just stolen his fatherhood. She had murdered his dignity. She had filled his daughter's innocent minds with the filthiest lies, turning him from a suffering victim into a violent monster in the memories of his own blood. She had built that empire of happiness on the living grave of Arthur Sterling's honor. Abusive? Alcoholic? Arthur muttered, his teeth grinding so hard they squeaked. "I searched for you for 20 years, I cried my soul dry. And this is how you repay me, Sarah." The hesitation vanished. The nobility evaporated. Arthur realized that if he walked away now, he would not be a heroic father sacrificing for his children, but a collaborator in Evelyn's vile deception. He could not let his daughters live their whole lives worshipping a lie while despising the raw, loving truth. The blood of the Sterling family, the blood of honest and proud, pure silver, was boiling in his veins. Arthur spun around. He was no longer walking toward the back door. He straightened his old tie, smoothed his messy hair. His eyes, once sorrowful and hopeless, now burned with the fire of a father reclaiming justice for himself. He headed straight toward the main banquet hall, where the music was playing loudly. The storm had arrived, and it would tear apart all those glamorous, fake facades. Inside the lavish hall decorated with thousands of white roses, Richard Vance was standing on the central stage, raising a champagne glass, his face glowing with happiness. The spotlight shone on him, turning him into the center of this miniature universe. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard began, his warm, deep voice echoing through the expensive sound system. "Today I am not only giving away a daughter, but I also want to thank life for bringing Isabella and Sophia to me. You two are my most precious treasures, more than any skyscraper I have ever built." Thunderous applause erupted. Evelyn Vance stood beside her husband, smiling in satisfaction, her eyes sparkling with triumph. She believed Arthur had slunk away like a beaten dog. But she was wrong. Bang! The large door to the banquet hall was pushed open so violently it slammed into the wall, creating a loud crash that made the entire room turn around in shock. The music stopped abruptly. Arthur Sterling walked in. No longer the timid, broken man hiding in the corner of the cathedral. He walked with long, decisive strides, head held high, eyes blazing with fury as he stared straight at the stage. Two large security guards immediately rushed forward to block his path. "Sir, is there a problem?" One guard growled, reaching out to grab Arthur's shoulder. "Take your hand off me." Arthur roared, his voice booming with such authority that the guard froze. "If you dare touch me, I'll sue you for assaulting the key witness in the kidnapping of the century." The wild determination in Arthur's eyes made the crowd instinctively step aside, creating a straight aisle leading up to the stage. Evelyn stood frozen on the platform. Her face drained of all color. She dropped her clutch bag to the floor. "Security! Throw him out. He's a drunk lunatic." Evelyn screamed, her voice cracking in panic. "Richard, don't let him near the girls." But Richard Vance, with the instinct of a man used to power, raised his hand to stop the guards. He narrowed his eyes at the man walking up the final steps. "Let him speak," Richard said coldly, suspicion shifting between his wife and Arthur. "Architect Sterling? What do you want?" "Ho you!" Arthur stepped up to the microphone, yanked it from Richard's hand in a rough but decisive motion. He stood there, facing hundreds of the most powerful people in New York, dressed in an old suit but standing tall like a mountain. "Richard," Arthur began, his voice deep and resonant, not trembling at all. "You are a good father. I can see that in the way you look at them. But I must tell you a cruel truth, you are nurturing and tending to flowers that were stolen from my garden." The entire hall gasped in shock. Isabella and Sophia froze, gripping each other's hands. "What the hell are you talking about?" Richard growled, stepping forward threateningly. "My wife said her ex-husband died long ago." "Died?" Arthur let out a bitter laugh, his eyes drilling into the trembling Evelyn. "Did she tell you I died in a car accident? Or did she tell the girls I was an alcoholic and an abuser who overdosed?" Isabella jerked, hand flying to her mouth. That was exactly what she had told Sophia in the dressing room. Arthur pulled an old, worn stack of photos from his jacket pocket. He held them high under the spotlight. This was 1996. "Look!" Arthur shouted, tossing the photos onto the nearest table so everyone could see them. "Lily and Rose. My twin daughters. They disappeared at the park in just 3 minutes while I turned around to buy ice cream. I did not die. I never stopped looking for them, not one single day in 20 years. Evelyn lunged forward, trying to grab the microphone. "Shut up, don't listen to him. He's trying to extort money." But Richard grabbed his wife's wrist with lightning speed. The force of his grip made Evelyn cry out in pain. "Stand still, Evelyn." Richard barked, then turned to Arthur. "Prove it. Old photos don't mean anything. There are thousands of similar children." Arthur turned to Isabella. His eyes softened, filled with overwhelming pain and boundless love. "Isabella," he called her name, voice breaking. "Or should I call you Lily? Look in the mirror. Your mother said the crescent-shaped scar under your chin was from your drunk father throwing you against a table, didn't she?" Isabella trembled, tears beginning to fall. "Yes. Mother said you were a monster. That is the vilest lie." Arthur cut in, his voice sharp. "You fell while learning to walk at age 2. You slipped on the wooden floor because you wore slippery socks. I didn't catch you in time. You screamed, blood soaked my shirt. And I held you, sitting in the old rocking chair, singing Moon River for 2 hours until you stopped. You only stopped when you heard that song." Arthur took a deep breath, and right there on the stage, he began to sing. His voice was hoarse, cracked, but overflowing with emotion. Moon River, wider than a mile. I'm crossing you in style someday. The hall went completely silent. Isabella collapsed to her knees. A childhood memory buried deep inside her burst awake with violent force. That melody. That sense of safety. It did not belong to Richard. It belonged to another man in her subconscious. Oh God! Sophia gasped, turning to her mother. Mother, tell me this isn't true. Evelyn's face turned chalk white. She staggered back, crashing into the champagne tower table. I did everything for you. I wanted you to have a better life. This man had nothing. Her indirect confession was the final nail in the coffin. Richard Vance released his wife's wrist as though he had touched burning coal. He looked at Arthur, then at his daughters, the naked truth laid out before him. The luxurious wedding celebration had suddenly turned into a courtroom of conscience, and the verdict about to be delivered would change all their lives forever. The air in the banquet hall felt drained. Evelyn Vance's indirect confession hung suspended in the room like a death sentence upon all the family's honor. Richard Vance, a man who had never bowed to any opponent in the business world, now stood there with eyes reddened by anger and betrayal. He turned to look at the wife who had shared his bed for 20 years, his voice cold and ruthless like the strike of a judge's gavel. So all these years, you came to me with a perfect script. You turned me into an accomplice in kidnapping someone else's children without me even knowing. Richard, let me explain. I did it because, Evelyn rushed toward him, but Richard raised his hand to stop her. Enough! He roared. Evelyn, this marriage ends right here. My lawyer will contact you. Either you leave with nothing, or you go to prison for kidnapping and fraud. Choose. Evelyn collapsed to the floor, her wailing echoing through the hall, but not a single person felt sympathy. Richard took a deep breath and turned to Isabella and Sophia, the two daughters he had raised as if they were made of glass. This was the moment of brutal truth. And you too, Richard said, his voice softening slightly but still calculating and authoritative. I still love you, even though the blood running in your veins is not mine. But I am a businessman, and I require absolute loyalty. He pointed toward Arthur, who stood alone in the aisle. I give you one final choice. If you stay here, continue being daughters of the Vance family, you will inherit this billion-dollar empire. But you must cut ties completely with that man. I will not tolerate any more scandals. The entire hall held its breath. But if you choose him, Richard continued, his voice sharpening, you walk out that door right now. With nothing. No credit cards, no private jet, no inheritance. You will be just Lily and Rose Sterling, daughters of an ordinary architect. Isabella trembled, tears smudging her expensive makeup. She turned to William Harrington, the man she had vowed to love just 15 minutes earlier. She hoped he would take her hand, tell her he loved her no matter who she was. But at that moment, the sharp clack of high heels cut through the tension. Mrs. Harrington, the groom's mother, a woman draped in diamonds, shot to her feet. William! She barked, her voice slicing through his hesitation. You know what you must do. The Harrington family is marrying into the Vance empire, not into the daughter of some ordinary architect. Mother! William stammered. If that girl walks out that door, this marriage is invalid. Mrs. Harrington declared coldly, looking at Isabella with disdain. Isabella looked at William, pleading silently. William pulled his hand away, avoiding her gaze. He straightened his tie, stepped back toward his mother, and muttered just loud enough to shatter Isabella's heart. Isabella, you know. My father's business depends entirely on Mr. Richard's capital. If you're no longer a Vance. I'm sorry. I can't risk my future. I will don't you. Isabella froze. In an instant, she realized all the glamour was nothing but a hollow shell. William's love, society's admiration, everything had been valued by Richard Vance's bank account. Arthur saw the pain in his daughter's eyes. He didn't want to force them into hardship. Isabella, Sophia, Arthur said softly, gently. I don't have wealth. All I have is the truth and these hands. I don't want to take away your future. Stay. I understand. Then he turned and walked away. His back looked lonely yet dignified, accepting sacrifice once more so his children could live in comfort. But that very act awakened the sterling blood in the two girls. "Wait!" Isabella shouted. She reached up, removed the $1 million diamond tiara from her head. It was heavy, but now she felt it was a pair of handcuffs. Clack! She slammed the tiara down onto the banquet table in front of Mrs. Harrington. She bent down, yanked the long cathedral train of her wedding gown, ripping it off to move freely. Next to her, Sophia knelt to remove her gem-studded heels and tossed them aside. She clasped her sister's hand tightly. "We're going," Sophia declared, looking straight into Richard Vance's eyes. "Thank you, Father Richard, for the past 20 years. But Dad, family is not a business deal where you set the terms." The two girls, barefoot, ran toward the fading silhouette of the man in the old suit walking toward the exit. "Lily. Rose." Arthur turned around, arms wide open, tears flooding his face. The three of them embraced at the cathedral's grand doors, leaving behind the blinding lights, the ambitious mother screaming in despair, and the powerful stepfather left alone on his golden throne. Outside the cathedral, snow began to fall. The final image was both heartwarming and haunting. The three stood huddled together on the sidewalk, waving down an old taxi in the bone-chilling New York winter. They had no luxury cars waiting, they had just given up a $1 billion inheritance, and tomorrow they would face the harsh reality of bills and survival. But as Arthur wrapped his arms around his shivering daughters, the smile on his face shone brighter than any diamond in that lavish banquet. Arthur Sterling had won. He had reclaimed his daughters after 20 long years. The family reunited in tears and in joy. To earn their father's embrace, Isabella and Sophia had given up the inheritance of a $1 billion empire, abandoned their life of luxury, and walked away from the bright future their calculating mother had built. They chose family over high society, truth over a golden lie. What do you think about Arthur's actions? Side A, Arthur is selfish. He should have stayed silent. The children were happy, and he showed up only to turn them into paupers. Can love be ground up and eaten? Side B, Arthur did the right thing. No amount of money can buy blood and truth. Evelyn is a kidnapper, she deserves no praise. What a beautiful ending to fatherly love. If you were Arthur, would you walk away so your children could live in luxury, or expose everything to reclaim justice? Leave your opinion below. This debate needs your voice.